Which is more embarrassing, do you think? A former Prime Minister and leader of the party who needs to use the chairman of the BBC as a financial fixer, or a former Chancellor of the Exchequer who can't get his tax sums right? Which is more embarrassing to you personally?
Well, look, as I say, they're being looked at by different people. The first example is being looked at by William Shawcross in the context of the appointments process, and the independent investigator is looking at the second. So they are being properly investigated. That's the right thing to do. That will maintain public confidence. In the meantime, what I'm doing is concentrating on hiring 20,000 extra police officers. So by March of this year, we'll have more police officers than we've ever had in our country's history. The Chancellor's, working hard on making sure. The PwC last week found the UK was the third best place in the world to invest, behind only the US and China. So we're concentrating on working on these important issues which are critical to the future of the country.
All the time in Parliament is dealing with issues of the way you're running the country. And to our viewers who are dealing with the cost of living and worrying about paying their energy bills and how to fill up the car this week and whether the strikes are going to affect them and getting a doctor's appointment, they might look at the current situation, all these allegations about government behaviour, and just think, these guys have run out of time.
No, but we've got a new Prime Minister who's got a new approach, and Rishi Sunak has been very, very clear, both as Chancellor and then, and then as Prime Minister, that ethics and integrity are really important to him. And where issues have arisen, he hasn't tried to brush them under the carpet or ignore them or hope they go away.
Well, he did. He said it was all dealt with last week.
Well, yeah, but as soon as it became clear there were still questions over the weekend, within 24 or 48 hours, he responded to that by launching an independent investigation. To be honest, no one really knows exactly what happens because tax affairs are rightly a private matter between an individual and HMRC. As the Prime Minister said yesterday, there are real questions that need to be answered here. The right thing to do is to get those properly investigated by the independent advisor on ethics. Nadhim Zahawi has said he's going to fully cooperate with that investigation, provide whatever information is needed, and that's the right way to go about sorting this out.
Sorry, Mr. Philp, you say nobody knows what happened. Well, Nadhim Zahawi knows what happened. Surely he should have told the Prime Minister what happened when he was appointed chairman, or a previous Prime Minister when he was appointed Chancellor.
We've seen a few examples, and this is one of them, where questions have been asked about somebody, and instead of ignoring it or brushing it under the carpet, he has quickly got on and launched an independent investigation to make sure we get to the bottom of it.
It wasn't
and that
quick.
is what you would expect to do.
It wasn't quick. These questions were there right throughout the summer. There was reporting of them. And indeed, they were very much front and centre on the 15th of January that the matter had been settled. Did he at that point not... Wouldn't the right thing to do, if you were really into honesty, accountability and integrity, to call the relevant person in and say, there's this thing in the paper. Is it true?
Well, look, I don't know what conversations took place, private conversations between the Prime Minister and Nadhim Zahawi. The Sun report you're referring to is only 9 days ago. The further information that was put into the public domain by Mr Zahawi himself over the weekend is like 2 or 3 days ago, and within, as I said already 2 or 3 times, within 24 to 48 hours of that, the Prime Minister launched an independent investigation, and that is what you would expect a Prime Minister to do in those circumstances. He's acted quickly, he's acted decisively. He hasn't brushed it under the carpet. It's going to be investigated independently so all of us can find out what the facts actually are. Because at the moment, owing to the private nature of tax arrangements between an individual and HMRC, we don't know exactly what the situation is. It's important we find out, and that is going to happen.
So the Prime Minister didn't know about the investigation into Nadhim Zahawi when he appointed him as chairman?
My understanding is that when the Prime Minister appointed Nadhim Zahawi, his understanding was there were no outstanding tax issues at that time, and I don't think. My understanding is that he wasn't aware of the discussions that had taken place previously. Clearly, over the weekend, further things were disclosed publicly, which has led the Prime Minister to appoint the independent ethics advisor to investigate, and that is exactly the right thing to do. It shows that the Prime Minister is acting exactly as he said he would to maintain ethics and standards in public life.
Do you think that paying a 7-figure penalty to HMRC when you're Chancellor is appropriate behaviour?
Well, I think the Prime Minister has said very clearly yesterday or the day before that there are some questions that need to be serious questions that need to be answered about this whole episode. Obviously, the details of exactly what happened between Nadhim Zahawi and HMRC, I don't know and you don't know, and that's why this independent ethics advisor is going to be looking into this.
Mr Zahawi himself has said that the taxman told him the error he made was careless, not deliberate. I'm sure you're aware of this, but the definition of carelessness in the tax code, careless means a failure to take reasonable care in relation to your tax affairs, which means it's not the same as just getting them wrong. Carelessness, according to gov.uk, can be likened to the long-standing concept in the general law of negligence. So Mr Zahawi himself has said his error was careless. Does the Prime Minister therefore think it is acceptable for a senior member of the government to be negligent in their tax affairs?
Well, as I say, we've got this word careless that's been put into the public domain. We don't know exactly what it was that carelessness represents, what exactly happened.
It's a failure to take reasonable care. That's the definition. How can a senior member of the government, who not long ago was running the Treasury, be careless in relation to their tax affairs?
Rishi Sunak has, I think, always said...
No, Mr Philp, you're talking about him as if he's someone who's sort of a random stranger. This is someone who holds one of the most senior positions in your party and has held the second most senior job in government. Why isn't this known already? Why are we having to have an inquiry into Nadhim Zahawi's tax affairs? Surely it's incumbent upon him to, A, do the right thing by paying the right amount of tax in the first place, and secondly, to be open and transparent about that with his boss in the first place.
Yeah, well, I agree to both of those points, but I don't know sitting here precisely what happened, and that's why and nor do you, frankly, nor does anyone.
Just spoken in the last few minutes to Caroline Noakes, a senior Conservative backbencher. She says she thinks Nadhim Zahawi should stand aside while this investigation goes on. What do you think of that idea?
Well, I think it's reasonable that where there's an investigation, that the person concerned is allowed to continue serving while that investigation continues. We do have a principle, don't we, in this country that innocent till proven guilty. That applies, I think, to in a whole range of different circumstances. So the investigation has been launched by the Prime Minister. That's the right thing to do. It'll get to the bottom of this, and then the Prime Minister will make his decision. But I don't think it's fair to jump to any conclusions before the investigation has concluded.
I don't think she was jumping to any conclusions, and she wasn't saying that he should resign. She just said he should stand aside while this investigation went on, recuse himself, and then maybe go back to his job if he's cleared. That seems fair enough, doesn't it? And then he's not a distraction.
Well, look, I don't take that view. I think we should let the investigation play out. The PM's acted decisively. Let's get to the bottom of this via the investigation, then we can take it from there.
Was he aware of the penalty that had been levied against Mr Zahawi?
I don't believe so. But as I say, what we need to do is get these facts fully investigated, properly, thoroughly, because you and I don't know, frankly, exactly what happened, because people's tax affairs are rightly private.
Completely right. Exactly.
Yeah, and that's why it's really appropriate that the independent ethics advisor properly looks into this, because you and I would be speculating otherwise.
But the curious thing, and the reason I mentioned this to you, is that Boris Johnson worked with Simon Case every day as Prime Minister and Cabinet Secretary. Why would he not introduce his loan guarantor to Simon Case himself? Instead, someone who is applying to BBC chairman to be BBC chairman at the same time did it. And that is damaging to the public broadcaster now, and that damage has been caused by this.
Well, you'd have to ask Boris Johnson that question. I don't know what he said or why he said it or why he didn't say it. You'd have to ask him that question.
Can you see that it's a very odd thing?
Look, I can see that Richard Sharp drew the matter to the Cabinet Secretary's attention. Perhaps he said he'd do that rather than Boris, but I honestly don't know. The Commissioner for Public Appointments is reviewing the whole thing, and he will no doubt get to the bottom of it. I've been assured that the proper process was followed in appointing Richard Sharp. That included scrutiny by a cross-party committee of members of Parliament, which I think gives a pretty good degree of assurance.